Hello. It's forecast to be another hot one here in Germany today. So I'm taking the dogs out while it's still nice and cool. And then later we'll visit a Burg, a castle, at the northernmost end of the Bergstrasse, Odenwald. It's probably the most famous castle in the northern half of the Bergstrasse. We'll cycle along the foot of the hills for about 10 kilometres going north, mostly flat. And then there's a climb of about 4 kilometres, varying between about 4 and about 8%. And that will give me the opportunity to demonstrate the Orbea at its very best. Then we'll have a look around the castle, tell you a few stories about it, and down the other side of the hill into the Odenwald, tour around there for a while, and back. What you see here is the range of hills that divides the Bergstrasse from the Odenwald. This side is the Bergstrasse, the other side is the Odenwald. And today we're going to be travelling to the northern end of the range of hills, which is this end. The whole length of the Bergstrasse, there's a series of little towns and villages. This one is called Seeheim. There are some very good cycle paths here in the Bergstrasse, so down at the foot of the hills, up in the Odenwald, over the hills there isn't really a need for them. But down here there are plenty. There are also cycle lanes along the side of the main road there. And a few minutes ago I saw some guys on road bikes using the cycle lanes. Now, why would you want to use a cycle lane on a busy main road when there's a really good quality cycle path like this one almost next to it? Now then, what we're going to do this morning is to cycle up this road, which starts off a fairly easy 4%, goes up to 5, 6, 7, 8 towards the top, takes about 15 minutes. And we'll visit one of the castles in the Bergstrasse, a Burg. And this is the one at the very northernmost end of the Bergstrasse, at the beginning of the Bergstrasse, Odenwald. So which better castle to visit first? So I've stopped briefly 2/3 of the way up to try to give you an idea of what a long, steady drag this is. It's about 6-7% where we are right now. Notice the complete absence of cyclists. You don't see many coming up here, and the ones you do see are going at a snail's pace. Nearly there. Climb about 4 kilometres. Average gradient 5, maybe 6%. Gets slightly easier here as we reach the top. We're almost at the Burg. Now then, here is the Burg, the castle in question. What's it called again? Oh yeah, Burg Frankenstein. Now hold on a minute, I hear you say. It's not the Castle Frankenstein, is it? Well, yes, it is. Allegedly. So why do I say allegedly? Well, there is in fact no hard evidence that Mary Shelley ever visited this place. However, she definitely did visit a place just behind me there down in the valley on the Rhine called Gernsheim, about 15 kilometres away, and she visited there as part of a European tour in 1814. Now, one or two of Mary Shelley's biographers have suggested that she was also influenced by the stories of one Johann Dippel, who lived here for a while in the 17th century. He was a well-known alchemist. It was also said that he practiced anatomy, and that while he was here, what he was doing was exhuming dead bodies from the local graveyard and then attempting to create a living being using a combination of alchemy and anatomy. Now, does that story sound familiar to you? So given all of that, I think that had I been a member of Mary Shelley's travelling party back in 1814, and if she had her mobile phone with her down in Gernsheim. Now, I know that's unlikely given that it was 1814. I'd be on the phone to her saying, Mary, get yourself up here. I think I found a location for your story and an excellent storyline. And finally, I should mention that, perhaps unsurprisingly, the local tourist board have no doubt whatsoever that this is the Castle Frankenstein, and they do some very good business around Halloween, I can tell you. And now we need to leave the bike here for a bit because we're setting off down into the grounds of the castle to discover another story. Now, one of the things I've learned about the Odenwald in medieval times is that the place was kind of infested with dragons, and one of them lived here in the grounds of Castle Frankenstein. And the dragons that lived here in the Odenwald had generally a bad reputation. They were always going around setting fire to things and eating people and generally being a bit of a nuisance. And this one was, by all accounts, a very unpopular dragon. And the reason it was unpopular is that it was fond of a takeaway. Strange reason for unpopularity, you might think. Now, you need to remember that this was in the 13th century or thereabouts, and at that time there were no Burger Kings or McDonald's franchises around here. So what the dragon used to do was he used to pop down on a Friday night to the nearest village on the Odenwald side, which is Niederbierbach, and get himself a takeaway. Now, unfortunately, that takeaway usually consisted of local villagers, and after a while the villagers got, understandably, kind of fed up with this. And so they engaged the services of a knight, one Lord Georg, and they persuaded Georg to come up here into these grounds and kill the dragon. So Georg came up here, suit of armour, sword, the works, and there was an almighty fight with the dragon. They kind of fought each other to a standstill, and then just at the very end, Lord Georg plunged his sword into the belly of the dragon. Unfortunately, simultaneously to this, the dragon swung his big tail round and stabbed Lord Georg with one of the poisonous barbs on his tail. So they both died. So on the one hand, the villagers were very grateful that the dragon was no more, but they were very sad at the death of Lord Georg. So they took his body down to Niederbierbach and buried him in a local church, and there is a tomb to him there to this day, where you can go and pay your respects. So now we're stepping outside the castle grounds in search of our next story. Yes, so now we're outside the castle grounds and I am in search of the Fountain of Youth. When I read about this place, I thought, Fountain of Youth, I could do with some of that. I'm getting a bit old and wrinkly, so I need to go and visit that place for sure. Now, you would think Fountain of Youth, fairly straightforward. You find the fountain, you take a drink, youthfulness is restored, and I could do with some of that. But it's not that simple. It's a complicated, in fact I would argue an overcomplicated Fountain of Youth. So while I try to find it, let me explain why it's overcomplicated. First, it only works for women. Now that seems to me to be rather discriminatory, not very diverse, not very inclusive. But I guess discrimination, diversity and inclusion were not such big things back in the Middle Ages, which is when this story begins. So complexity number one, the fountain only works for women, but it gets worse. It only works on one night of the year. And even that's complicated. And that's because the night it works on is not always the same night. It is the first full moon after Walpurgisnacht, Walpurgis night. And that is the night between the 30th of April and the 1st of May. Big witching time around here. So it works on the first full moon after then, and only that night. And what would happen in these medieval times is that on that night, old women from the neighbouring villages would compete with each other, because the next complication is only one of them gets to drink from the fountain of youth. Not specified exactly what this competition looked like, but it involved them competing in tests of courage. Now, given what I've been saying earlier, I've no doubt that these tests of courage involved dragons in some way. Possibly the medieval equivalent of sneaking up on the dragon and taking a selfie with it while it was asleep. Anyway, they'd go through these tests of courage, and eventually a winner would be declared. And the winner of these old women would proceed to the fountain. She would drink from the fountain, and she would be restored to the condition she was in on her wedding night. That would be fine and good if you had got married when you were, let's say, 20. But I think if you had not got married until you were, say, 60, 61, 62, and you went to all that trouble of winning that competition, you'd be a bit disappointed with the prize. Right, the location of the Fountain of Youth, I think it's just along here. It's supposed to be just beyond the herb garden. And I now know what one of the tests of courage was. Coming up here this last few metres, you've got to fight your way through many stinging nettles. So I guess that was one of the tests of courage. And this, I think, is the site of the Fountain of Youth. As you can see, there is no fountain. But then, remember, it only appears on one night of the year, and not even the same date at that. So it's a kind of elusive fountain. Perhaps I was wrong, of course. Perhaps this is the Fountain of Youth. I should also mention that here up at the castle there's quite a nice little kiosk with seats outside, which is not open yet. And if you're feeling hungry, also not open yet, it's too early, there is a restaurant with a terrace. That's a terrace up there, with nice views out over the Rhine Valley. Now, I am absolutely terrified of heights, so I'm not going to stay up here for any length of time, and I haven't even gone to the top of the tower. But just for your information, the buildings, the skyscrapers you can see in the distance there, that's downtown Frankfurt, and the hills away in the distance, that's the Taunus, which I may visit another time. One of the many things that I like about the Odenwald is, even on a hot day like this, there are some good areas, wooded areas, where you can get some relief from the heat, and the roads are nice and quiet. So I'm descending the Odenwald side of the hill that Burg Frankenstein sits on top of. And this is quite nice because, as you can see, it's heavily wooded, nice and shaded. And that's good news because the temperature is getting up pretty close to 30. So now I'm emerging from the woods on the Odenwald side of the hill that Castle Frankenstein sits on. And as you'll see in a moment when we get out, the landscape looks very different from the Bergstrasse on the other side. This is the Odenwald side of the hill from Burg Frankenstein, and as you can see, the landscape is completely different from down in the Rhine Valley in the space of about 2 kilometres. Now, it also feels to me as though it's considerably cooler on this side of the hill, but that could be to do with the fact that I'm freewheeling down this side of the hill, whereas I was cycling up a steep hill to get to the Burg. Could be. That's one of the hazards you've got to watch out for on these little Odenwald roads. Now I don't know if you can see that just at the end of the road there. Sitting on the road, that's a great big hare. I'm gonna try and... Nah, it's run off. I do like Oberbeerbach. Earlier on I was up at the top of that very green field you can see over there, over where the horses are. And to get home I've got to get up past these, round through these hills there. So what did we learn from today's bike ride to Castle Frankenstein? Well, I think we learned many things. Admittedly, most of them were not very useful. Two things stood out though. One is that long, steady 4, 5, 6% climb to get to the top of the hill, that's exactly what the Gain is best at. It kind of gets you up there and allows you to enjoy whatever's on the other side. The second thing is that if you get in a fight with a dragon in the Odenwald, then it's best to watch out for the spikes on the tail as well as the fiery breath. Although, to be honest, the really smart move is not to pick a fight with a dragon in the first place. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed our little trip to Castle Frankenstein. Maybe see you next time. Two dragons walk into a bar. First dragon says, "Phew, it's hot in here." Second dragon says, "Oh, just shut your mouth."